Good evening. It's November 1st, 2013, and I would like to welcome all of you watching to our weekly live broadcast, webcast featuring Mr. Lyndon LaRouche. My name is Matthew Ogden, and I will be moderating tonight's event. I'm joined by Dennis Mason in the studio, and the format of tonight's proceedings will be a series of questions, which Mr. LaRouche will have an opportunity to give his response. Tonight, we will be beginning with a question which has come in from a Washington, D.C. based source. And it's a short question. I will just read it as it was written. Mr. LaRouche, recent revelations that the NSA collected information and intercepted foreign leaders' phone calls have proven to be embarrassing to the White House and the President. There are calls by friendly world leaders and some of our European allies to sign a treaty banning these types of collections by the NSA. Do you support such treaties? And what are your recommendations to the U.S. intelligence community on so-called friendly data collections?
What we're dealing with the intention of genocide against many people in the United States and in foreign countries. This is a very serious problem because we have the Democratic Party in particular but the Republican Party is not very good, but the Democratic Party is worse in the sense that they are fully supporting a policy of which is tantamount to genocide. It's not called genocide, but in point of fact it is. Now, many of people are receiving cutoffs in terms of all kinds of benefits, which some of these benefits, cutoffs of benefits, would mean starving people to death, or virtually starving them to death. But this is part of a British plan which was set up to reduce the human population from 7 billion people to 1. And this Obama is an agent of that policy. As you can see that he is obviously a representative of the interests of the Queen of England. And she is the person who is actually the chief public advocate of this genocide. And the genocide is what she proposes is the reduction of the human population from 7 billion people to 1. And that is planned on nationwide, worldwide. That's what the issue is. So if already what is happening in the United States already is the attacking of people with the same exact policy as Adolf Hitler, but worse. And that's what the issue is. So therefore, the obvious thing is that we are opposed to this, and we will do everything possible to sabotage, prevent this plan of genocide, which the Queen of England is the official sponsor of. But many others are. The problem is that members of the Democratic Party, out of stubborn foolishness, are supporting implicitly. They're not saying that, but they're actually imposing this. Their policy is a policy of genocide, in effect, because of their complicity. The problem here is not that they intend to do genocide. They don't. At least I don't think so. You may have a couple of Republicans around that are really for genocide. But in this case, the point is people are just stupid. They insist upon being stupid. Because why? They want to fit into the club. They're afraid of losing privileges in the club. And therefore, they're willing to go along with a policy which, in point of fact, because Obama's policy is one of genocide. The President of the United States has a policy of genocide against the people of the United States, just as much and worse than that of what Adolf Hitler initially put into effect in Germany. And this thing goes on. For example, you have some of the Bush family. Prescott Bush, for example, was the first person to introduce genocide internationally. And the Bush family has a tradition from Prescott Bush on down, which moves in that direction. Now, the Bushes are sometimes hard to figure, because they're a little bit stupid, the younger Bushes and so forth, or something like that. But the point is the intention of policy, of the policies they support, contain the process of genocide. And therefore, it's urgent that we eliminate the ability of the Congress itself to continue. There is, the Snowden effect process is now a very active feature in the warning against genocide. It's not put exactly that way, but that's what it amounts to. And what happened to the prime minister or the chief minister of Germany? Same thing. So we are living now under a dictatorship. The dictatorship is controlled by people inside the United States and Europe who are committed to genocide, in fact. The policies of those, like the policies of the present president of the United States, is a policy of genocide against the people of the United States. And therefore, obviously, this issue should be addressed accordingly. We've got to throw these guys out of power in government who represent those kinds of policies, either explicitly or implicitly.
Well, let me follow up directly on this question of genocide. Earlier this week, LaRouche issued a statement titled Glass-Steagall or Mass Genocide, and it's being distributed in this form, available on the website. And this statement begins by saying the following: the entire transatlantic financial system is hopelessly bankrupt, and the only solution is the immediate reinstatement of Glass-Steagall in the United States. Unless the Congress passes Glass-Steagall in the coming days and weeks, breaking the power of Wall Street and restoring a commercial banking system free from the quadrillion dollars in derivatives and other gambling debts, the American people will soon be facing a mass kill, far beyond the genocidal horrors that have been imposed on Greece, Portugal, Ireland, Cyprus, and Spain. Wall Street must be bankrupted before they bankrupt us all. Now, we are already seeing the killer effects of Obamacare. As announced last week, we have published a fact sheet, which is preliminarily documentation of the murder, which is already ongoing as a result of the Obamacare policy, which Dr. Mark Shelley has warned directly echoes the Hitler T4 policy in its early days, and which Dr. Leo Alexander identified as the beginnings of the slippery slope to genocide in the Nuremberg tribunals. Now, today marks the day that a major facet of the food stamp program, which 48 million Americans depend on to survive, which is 1/7 of the American population. A major facet of this food stamp program is scheduled to expire today, which means that $5 billion will be cut out of the food stamp benefits to this portion of the American people. That's the equivalent of approximately 16 meals per month, which will be missed by a family of 3, or a total of 2 billion meals over the next 12 months that the American people will go without. And already, even prior to today, many parents who are on food stamps skip meals in order to make sure that their children can eat. So, in other words, there's already widespread hunger among the American people. And these cuts will only escalate that starvation. These cuts will kill. And the effects are actually hitting children the hardest. Now, this statement, Glass-Steagall or mass genocide, it ends with a clear statement of the fact that the message from Obama is either if you're sick and old or if you're young, both of which you are as good as dead. And the message which is coming from both Obama, the congressional Democrats who are defending Obama, and the Republicans is that we're going to cut Social Security, we're going to cut Medicare, we're going to cut Medicaid, and this is a death policy being dictated directly from Wall Street and Obama. So I think the point is, without Wall Street, without Glass-Steagall to shut down this Wall Street policy, the American people will suffer a mass kill. And I would like it if you could address this question of the role of Glass-Steagall in defeating this genocide policy.
It's really elementary, and it's really a constitutional principle that's being violated. This is just plain mass murder. But what is the cause of this problem? The Queen of England has set forth a policy in which she says we must reduce the world's population from 7 billion people to 1 billion people. That is the current policy of the Queen of England and people who share her points of view. It's that simple. So therefore, unless we overthrow those elements of government which are committed to supporting the Queen's policy, genocide will happen. And the genocide will be much worse than that perpetrated under Hitler. Therefore, anybody who is not opposing this genocide is guilty, just as much as any Nazi was, of mass murder of people. And the people should know that and remember that. If you are supporting the Queen's policy, which is what this policy you've just discussed are, if you support that policy, you are as guilty as Adolf Hitler or worse. That's the simple fact of the matter. And therefore the question, can the American people, for example, defend themselves against mass genocide worse than that by Adolf Hitler?
Well, you stated in a discussion last night that the impeachment of Barack Obama would have the single greatest effect for the continued survival of the United States. And the support for impeachment certainly continues to grow among the American people. I mean, seemingly week by week. Earlier this week, we had a chance to attend a rally of over 2,000 coal miners from around the United States who came to Washington, D.C. and held a very high visibility rally right on the front lawn of the Capitol. And they were protesting. They were there to protest Obama's war on coal. But to our surprise, almost every single person at that rally was carrying a sign that read, "Save America, Impeach Obama." And I actually should have brought a sign. I grabbed one. I should have brought one with me tonight. They also had signs interspersed that said, "Global warming is a hoax," and "Carbon dioxide is not a pollutant." Now, interestingly, it was Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia, who's a Democrat, who was actually the only member of Congress out of all of them who addressed the crowd to acknowledge that the majority of the miners who had come to this rally were carrying signs calling for Obama's impeachment. And in his remarks, he assured them that that message was being heard loud and clear down Pennsylvania Avenue in the White House. So you take that. Also this week, interestingly, a press release was issued by Representative Steve Stockman, who is a congressman, a Republican congressman from Texas, announcing that he had distributed copies of a new book titled "Impeachable Offenses: The Case for Removing Barack Obama from Office." He had distributed a copy of that book to every single member of Congress. And he stated, I hope this book helps convince my colleagues to hold Barack Obama legally responsible for his disregard for the law. From Benghazi to Fast and the Furious to crony deals for so-called green energy to Obamacare, the lawless Obama administration must be reined in. I am calling on Congress to establish select committees on these scandals with full subpoena power. We've seen how the Obama administration smears and defames their critics. Congress should investigate these scandals and turn the matters over to special prosecutors. So, in light of your continued calls for the immediate removal of this president from office, I thought it would be appropriate in this setting to give you a chance to comment.
Well, there's not much really to say to add to that, because that simply states the essential point in and of itself. I could say a lot of things about it, but I think perhaps we can get some on that and down the line here. Good.
Okay, I have a question on the danger of war. You've kept a clear, consistent focus on the danger that there could be an outbreak of thermonuclear war, which only increases each day that Barack Obama stays in office. Now, this week there was an incident in China's Tiananmen Square with a vehicle crashing and exploding, killing 2 and injuring 38 people. Now, it was reported that Chinese President Xi Jinping and 6 other top officials were in the square at the time. Now, this has officially been called a terrorist event, with the East Turkestan Islamic movement being implicated. This is a Uyghur movement, and it's not that hard to trace the Saudi support to these movements. Now, also, we've had the Chechen terrorists calling for bombing Sochi, Russia, which is the host for this year's Winter Olympic Games. And again, it's not hard to trace Saudi support, you know. And this comes along with the recent push from Prince Bandar bin Sultan to Russian President Vladimir Putin on supporting the war in Syria. And Bandar was rebuffed by Putin. Now, also, there were 7 remote-controlled bombs detonated in Patna, India. This killed 6 people, and Indian security authorities named Tashin Akhtar, who is a leader of the Indian Mujahideen, as a primary suspect. And again, the Indian Mujahideen, they have set up base in Western Asia, and it's been reported that Saudi Arabia is emerging as their preferred destination. Now, on top of these terrorist actions, in the 3 countries which you've cited as the heart of the Trans-Pacific development, it's also been reported that Syria was bombed again, with the Israeli press indicating that the base was hit with missiles from offshore. Now, Israel has not officially commented on this, nor any of the previous strikes on Syria, but they have warned repeatedly that they would act if they thought that major weapons were to be transferred from Syria over to Hezbollah. So there's more, but this gives a quick sense of the fact that the danger of a major war is still very hot. Could you address this?
The way to understand this is that on the 2nd of January of 2001, I spoke to my friend then, Bill Clinton, and when his wife was standing by, and she was aghast. Bill was not aghast. I said that we must expect in this year a major terrorist attack on the people of the United States. And she was aghast. How do you know this? Well, I'm good at that, right? But that is the way to look at this thing from that standpoint. All right, now what happened then? What happened was that in the fall of that year, we had the actual attack on Manhattan and other points. A terrorist attack on the people of the United States. The terrorist attack, in point of fact, was run by the British monarchy and by the Saudi kingdom. As a matter of fact, the man who is now the head of the government of the Saudi kingdom, and similar kinds of positions. It was the leading factor in organizing. Now, he was at that time, actually was a representative of Saudi Arabia to the United States. This guy actually conducted the preparations of the operation for the attack on the 9/11 case. All right. Now, what goes further is that this attack was actually orchestrated by the British monarchy, by the BAE, which is the British Saudi arms business, and by the Saudi kingdom itself. And so, what do you want? What do you want to know? That we have a Bush family. Remember what happened? That thing. The port was shut down. All the airways were shut down, except for getting from Texas, chiefly Texas, but other places, shipping out Saudis who were the guests of Bush, of the Bush family. And these people were allowed to get out of the United States when nobody else was. And who was the president at that time? George W. Bush Jr. Now, I don't say that George W. Bush Jr. is the genius who organized 9/11. The Saudi agent was that. The Saudi people Saudi agents did that. And what was passed under the Bush administration of that time, was the first act to suppress all information on those pages in the report, which identified the Saudi responsibility for the assassinations in 9/11. Now, this is what you're looking at. Now, what happened then? The Bush family has had an evil record ever since it came into power with Prescott Bush. Prescott Bush was the man who brought Adolf Hitler into power, just personally. And the Bush family has had a related tradition of that type ever since. So what you see around the world today is you have the Anglo-Saudi, also Danish, I'm not Danish, but that particular operation is what the problem is today, the continuation of that. So you have to look at these things not in terms of just individuals who are guilty or groups of personalities which are guilty. You've got to look at several kinds of guilt. Who perpetrated and executed the terror, the mass murder? Who knew about it? Who was an accomplice with them? As like the Saudis. And like the British monarchy. It was the British monarchy which was part of this operation. Now, who's guilty of 9/11? The Bush family? The president of the United States under Bush? What about the current president of the United States, who's also guilty, has his own complicity in the same terror, and proceeds to commit genocide against the people of the United States? What more do you need to hear? The point is, do we have the guts to force our government to do its duty, to defend the United States and its people, and to kick this bum that's now the current president out of office in order to save the people of the United States? What's happened is you've got a situation in which the Democratic Party is an accomplice of this process. Why? Well, they have their own idea of what they think is good for them to vote for, what they think is good and convenient for them to be reelected or whatever it is. But these guys are systemically rejecting any responsibility for the defense of the people of the United States against these horror shows. And they are in complicity. Remember, the Congress is in complicity with the intent for virtual genocide against the people of the United States. They condone legislation which calls for that. And we've got to wake up. You could become extinct tomorrow. That's the situation, and somebody's got to stop this. And we don't have many people in government in the United States who have the guts or the brains to recognize this problem and to address it. We need people of courage who will not put up with this kind of evil or not condone it in the terms of practice of people, of even our own people. Our citizens who are condoning, knowledgeably condoning, policies which lead to that result must be held responsible for their failure to do their duty.
Well, speaking of persons of courage, it's clear that Edward Snowden is certainly scaring the hell out of the Obama administration, both because they really have no idea what he's really got on them, and also because there are more young Ed Snowdens out there in the intelligence community. As you know, there was a march against the NSA last Saturday in Washington, D.C., and several thousand people showed up, and Edward Snowden actually sent a personal message to the march. It was read by a woman named Jesselyn Radek, who attended the march, and she's a representative of it's called whistleblower.org, or it's an organization called the Government Accountability Project. And she was interviewed yesterday on ABC News, and she stated that the Obama administration's attempts to intimidate other members of the intelligence community, to put the screws on them, to prevent them from speaking out like Snowden did, these attempts are backfiring. She said, government attempts to chill free speech by employees in the intelligence community have failed and are actually having the contrary effect, causing more whistleblowers to step forward. She said, courage is contagious. And her organization has seen increasingly more and more people coming to their door after Snowden made his initial revelations. And she said she's confident that there will be more Edward Snowdens, and much more will be revealed on top of what Snowden has produced thus far. It's also being reported now that in the wake of this entire expose concerning Angela Merkel, the German government is now appointing a special prosecutor to investigate the NSA's violations of German national sovereignty. And a representative of the German parliament has actually traveled to Moscow to meet personally with Edward Snowden. And all the while, the Obama administration continues to deny, cover up everything, only to have those denials exposed sometimes within hours of their utterance as lies, with new revelations that have been published in the press. So I have a follow-up question to this, but maybe you can address this process of the Watergating of Obama and the orchestration of his downfall with this entire Snowden affair.
Well, there's an amusing aspect to this. It's not that the problem is amusing, but it's ironical and pleasingly ironical, the way in which history sometimes turns around. For example, this unit that Snowden had represented was a group of young people who had been through special kinds of conditioning with the sports they played, the games they played as sports. And so they were brought in as cheap labor of a kind, relatively speaking. Instead of having the full usual panoply of people, you would train some people with various kinds of techniques, and they would be able to conduct intelligence operations of various kinds, the input and the output as well. And Snowden was one of those people. So you have the irony. We have a U.S. government. The U.S. government has a background to it, even despite the Bush family. There was still, even in that period, there were aspects of people in the intelligence services who were honestly patriotic. Now, sometimes they weren't specifically patriotic in the sense that that was not their business. They were doing a job. And the job involved something which led to, in many cases, a patriotic investigation. They were disgusted by what the intelligence services were doing under the Bush tradition and the Obama tradition. We have to realize that the Bush administration and the Obama administration are both evil. George H.W. Bush, as president, was a goofball, and therefore he was removed from government not by not being reelected. But goofball George H.W. Bush was simply the person who introduced something. He was the enemy of everything decent to begin with, but he wasn't a very intelligent, nor was George W. Bush Jr. He's not a particularly intelligent guy. He's pretty much a dope-ridden jerk. But he was in the position, and he was under Cheney's direction, and people like that. So now what happens? You go through a couple of generations, or a generation and a half. They take a person who has been in the military service or the intelligence services of this type, like Snowden had been. In the process, what they see and what they experience disgusts them. Therefore, they don't want any part of it. They hate it. They despise it. They like to play games. That's how they got in the business. They're good at playing games, all kinds of games, but they do it very well. And Snowden is a good example. The Bush administration and its sequel, the Obama administration, has learned what a simply intelligent and gifted intelligent young person can do if they are assigned to an intelligence operation. They may get smart enough to be better than the bosses. And this is what has happened. So there are also, throughout the process of today, there are all kinds of things of that type that go along with history. Generations pass, 4 years for each term in office. So now we're going into the second pair of terms of Obama. 3 terms completed and 1 in process. And that has been that period of history. And it's in that period of history that Snowden came forward as one of the people among a significant number who realize that their duty as patriots to the United States interest requires them to scheme to bring about the downfall, if possible, of the swine who have destroyed our republic. And that's the way to look at it, because that's what we actually know about Snowden from this point on, and the Snowden affair. And it's typical. Obama is something that must be removed from office. His policies are evil. They are profoundly evil. He's actually a patriot with respect to the United States. And despite the cowardice of many of our elected members of Congress and of other people, there are people who think it's important to play a personal role in history, to save and defend our republic and other interests which are humane interests. And we must just hope that there are a number of us to be successful in destroying that evil process which is destroying our republic.
Well, you had an opportunity to speak directly to one of those patriots this past weekend. Former Congressman Cornelius Gallagher from New Jersey. And I think Neil Gallagher was right in the middle of fighting the prequel to what Snowden has exposed, with the mass surveillance of U.S. citizens that the NSA is perpetrating now. This began with what J. Edgar Hoover was doing in the time of John F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and Bobby Kennedy. And this surveillance of U.S. citizens and even members of Congress was something that Neil Gallagher took on personally and suffered the consequences of having the courage to stand up as an individual and decide to take that on. But with the same respect that America owes Cornelius Gallagher, he has the equal amount of respect for you, for what you have done. I just want to read one short segment of what Congressman Gallagher had to say last weekend in speaking directly to you. He said, "America owes a great debt of gratitude, I think, to you, Lynn. Whether we fully agree with everything you say or not, you have been a courageous statesman who has always been in the forefront of what was needed in America at a time when few people were paying attention to what really has been happening to our government. You've given a wellspring of hope to our people in our country and around the world as our government goes on its merry imperial way, questioning the very essence of freedom and privacy." So, in an indirect way, I think that this generation of young people that Edward Snowden is a product of has gained and gleaned inspiration from both what you have done, Lynn, and what Cornelius Gallagher has done, and a small handful of patriots of that generation. And I would just like to give you an opportunity to say something about that.
Well, I think one part that's exaggerated in these accounts is to speak of my courage, because it's that courage is not really the means by which I function. The problem here is most human beings, good citizens of our own country and so forth, with good intentions, do not understand the crucial factor which motivates me, for example, but also motivates many other people. And I think Cornelius would agree if you asked him just directly what I'm about to say. He would say, yes, that's true. Because my motivation is not to be a hero as such. My motivation is not to gain something as such. My motivation is to know that I am going to die. And that the question is, what will I have contributed to humanity? Now, what that means is this. Most people think that is simply courage. There are many people who act out of what is called courage. They don't know what they're doing or why. They will sometimes, like heroes in warfare or other things, they will sometimes recognize that they had done a heroic act. But they wouldn't understand how that worked, how that motivated them. The difference lies in the difference between a human being and an animal. The human being has if they are properly developed human beings, their motivation lies in the fact that they believe that they live for the purpose of contributing to mankind knowledge that you would never get from memory or deduction. Is knowledge of the future. Actually direct knowledge of the future. Anything I've done is because I am one of those people who are gifted enough to be able to understand what it means to have your identity located in the future. We're all going to die. All human beings are going to die, as well as animals. Therefore, what motivates us to see something in the future which our fellow man does not see? Now, the characteristic of that is all great discoveries of physical principle, such as those as Max Planck or Albert Einstein. They're discoveries, and all true discoveries of principle, physical principle, come from knowing the future, not knowing just the present. There are very few people in the United States or elsewhere still at these times who are actually discoverers, are actually creative scientists, truly creative scientists. The truly creative scientist, in the sense that I've done creative science in that way, is a reflection of this principle, that I've not only practiced this principle, but I understand this principle. My motivation is based on that principle. And I'm not easily fooled. because I'm not concerned with what I get now. I'm concerned with what I contribute to the future in terms of principled ideas, notions of principle, which are yet to be discovered, and to be one of the discoverers. But the human being differs from the human being and the animal. And unfortunately, very few of our people really understand that difference. The difference is to know the future before it has happened. And any human being has the potential ability to have that kind of knowledge. Unfortunately, the number of people, or ratio of number of people who actually have those qualifications is minimal. But I'll tell you, every great discoverer of physical principle, in particular, or similar kinds of discovery, always based their discovery on knowing the future before it happened. These are the things we call discoveries of principle, physical discoveries, and similar kinds of discoveries. And the problem is our education system has never really enhanced that and been forward on that. As a matter of fact, our ability to think clearly today is far less by 1 or 2 generations than now. The number of people who actually have the ability to foresee the future is diminished. But every great scientist, that is, who made a great discovery of principle as such, always discovered that principle in the future, not in his present. You go to the verge of a discovery. You have not reached that discovery yet. You're about to reach that discovery. And there's a transition from the moment you didn't know what the answer was, but you felt it coming on you. And the next moment, it came on you. It's that simple. And so therefore, what happens is people who understand the future, as I do in particular, as one example case. There are other people who are probably much more qualified than I am in this respect. But when you start from that procedure, you know that what you are is something that belongs to the future. Your courage lies in the fact that you know that what you are doing is going to change the future. And unfortunately, there are very few people who have acquired that kind of experience and talent. Because take the education system, for example. What's wrong with our education system? What's wrong with every university I ever attended or participated in any way? They were all intrinsically incompetent in this respect. Because what they were trained in a way to do is to learn after me. That is to lay down a set of predetermined principles, which are part of the educational program, mathematics or whatever. And the student is expected to learn to obey those designs, specific designs. The result is you stupefy the typical student. And this is university students and products as well. Because they believe that they have to respond to what they think is truth. And truth is the thing that was buried in the back of the book. Memorizing what was in the banner of the book, back of the book. Whereas I know that, and I've always resented this other crap, because it's not honest. Here they are, they're learning something. They're being taught in the university, they're learning something, and it's not original. They didn't discover it. They copied it. Or they looked carefully to make sure they had copied something from the back of the book, or something like that in the classroom. And therefore, it's our educational system, even under better conditions, back in the post-war period and so forth. The stupidity was learning much too much from the book, rather than meeting a standard of solving a problem as a problem made by your own discovery. And that's why we have people are crippled, are indecisive, cannot make decisions under fire, because they depend upon what they could have remembered from the classroom teachings or whatever they were from something else. And this is where the trick lies. People who can do what I have been able to do in part, and other people of the same kind, always look base themselves on not trying to copy the past, but discovering the future. Without that ability to discover the future, you have no inner confidence in yourself for making actual discoveries. You want to look at the back of the book or look at the back of the program and see what was written there and try to copy it quick. Huh? And that's what makes people stupid. Not because they're stupid, but because they have failed to meet the challenge of knowledge. And that kind of knowledge is the difference between discovery of principles and trying to copy them and memorize them.
Coming up at the end of this month, November 22nd, we're going to be commemorating the 50th anniversary of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. Now, I was reading a speech that John F. Kennedy delivered less than 1 month before his assassination, October 26th, 1963, which was 50 years ago this past Saturday. And he delivered this speech at Amherst College in Massachusetts. And the occasion was the inauguration of the Robert Frost Memorial Library at Amherst College. But Kennedy used it as a beautiful opportunity to discuss the role of the poet in society. And in a way that really was reminiscent to me of Percy Shelley and the unacknowledged legislator of mankind. He said that the artist is he who must often sail against the currents of his time and plays a sometimes solitary and unpopular role in the moment, but that his instinct for reality must serve to save society from its own arrogance, narrowness, and corruption. For art establishes the basic human truth which must serve as the touchstone for our judgment. This is what he says. If sometimes our greatest artists have been the most critical of our society, it is because their sensitivity and their concern for justice, which must motivate any true artist, makes him aware that our nation falls short of its highest potential. I see little of more importance to the future of our country and our civilization than full recognition of the place of the artist. In serving his vision of the truth, the artist best serves his nation. And the nation which disdains the mission of art invites the fate of having nothing to look backward to with pride and nothing to look forward to with hope. That's Kennedy.
Okay. It really is the same thing I just spoke about. Because people don't understand the importance of classical poetry, classical music, classical drama, and so forth. Huh? They don't understand it. It's all for them something that's pretty, or something like that. But they don't understand that the discovery of a universal physical principle and the discovery in terms of a great classical poetry are the same thing. So therefore, in classical music, it's the same thing. The idiot in music, does not understand classical music. If they try to understand it as classical music, they don't understand anything. They make a mess of it. It's like the case of some of the great non-composers. So this is the same thing. What is called the human identity, as distinct from the animal, is based on classical poetry, classical drama, and discoveries of universal physical principles, and things like that. People underestimate the importance of classical artistic composition, of classical poetry. And Shakespeare, for example, the mystery of that, which is one of my favorites, of Henry V, in the case of this particular case, brings forth in this one principle the actual expression of true creativity. And so most people try to do pretty things. They try to do clever things. But they don't understand, again, creativity. Human beings, the human species, is unique from all animals because in the human mind and its development, there's the ability to anticipate the future and to enjoy and be enriched by actually reliving the future and going on from the relived future to the next stage of the future. And classical poetry, classical music, real classical music, not the garbage type. Like, for example, I could just go through the whole thing. This is what's wrong in the school system. The school system says that it's entertainment. Well, it may be entertaining. As a matter of fact, it can be very exciting and very pleasantly and startlingly exciting. But it's not some toy to play with. It's not some fantasy. It's the most essential thing of life. If you can raise a child to be creative in poetry and drama, you probably will make them a great scientist, like the case of Einstein, Albert Einstein. He was a very competent musician. He was inspired by his work in music, in his treatment of composition. And the problem is we are deprived by our contemporary culture, which is a stupid culture, which prides people being stupid and learning how to imitate stupidly. And the result of that is their experience. They come out of the educational process and so forth, and they're never able to really make a discovery, a true discovery. Only the human mind can do that. And those who abuse their human mind lose the ability to do that. And the problem of society today is there are a very small fraction of society, including the United States in particular. The U.S. population today is far less intelligent, not just less than, but awfully absent of intelligence. And the great problem, the challenge is for us to challenge other people to be able to solve the problem, the mysteries of the future, to experience the future. And until you can experience the future, you cannot be trusted because you are not because you're bad, but because you're not competent. And the great problem is that in our culture, we have destroyed classical artistic composition. Take the kind of junk that people call entertainment today. The literature, the drama, all these things is pure junk, especially from the standpoint of the human mind. There's very little of the human mind in it. It's like clowns imitating each other.
Okay. I have one final question for the evening, which is on the question of the future, on the trans-Pacific perspective. Now, the LaRouche movement is hosting a conference in California this weekend on the trans-Pacific development perspective. So I'd like to give you the opportunity to address this question. Now, in the trans-Pacific, that's where economic development right now is actually beginning to flourish. There's been the Chinese initiated motion on the New Silk Road, or the Iron Silk Road as it is sometimes called. There's been a flurry of agreements between Russia, China, and India, which we discussed in this forum a bit last week. Now, there has also been a lot of activity on the development of nuclear power, and it's been said by some that the nuclear resource is really the resource of the human mind, because it's not based on just a fixed amount of stuff that you happen to find in the ground somewhere, but it's the result of our knowledge of how to make use of the atom. You could call this activity nuclear proliferation in the very best sense of the term. Now, for example, you have the first fission plant in Turkey is right now being built by Russia. This will have 4,800 megawatts of power. And now, as of this week, Japan and Turkey have signed agreements for another plant, also at 4,800 megawatts. Now, following that agreement, the two nations signed a joint declaration for the establishment of a strategic partnership between the Turkish Republic and Japan, covering collaboration on nuclear energy, science, and technology. Now, you also have Jordan has named Russia as their preferred candidate in construction of that nation's first nuclear power plant. This goes along with Egypt's plans for their first fission plant. The United Arab Emirates plans 5,600 megawatts of power by 2020. Now, the drive for fusion has also crossed the Pacific to the United States. The United States Secretary of Energy went to China to meet with officials there, saying that, quote, nuclear collaboration played an important role in our visit, and deservedly so. They had discussed further cooperation between Westinghouse and China's nuclear industry. A memorandum of understanding was signed in May, this last May, between Westinghouse and China's State Nuclear Power Corporation for joint work in development of a small modular reactor. And it should be kept in mind that Russia has developed the Akhmedishin Lomonosov, which is a floating modular reactor. So this is everywhere. And to round out this picture a little bit, I'd report that for the first time in the 89-year history of the World Energy Congress, fusion energy was included on the formal agenda as part of the discussion. This year's Congress was hosted in South Korea. So there's a lot of activity. There needs to be tons more, but there is motion, particularly driven by the Trans-Pacific region. So again, on the eve of the opening of the conference in California, the afternoon session, my understanding is it's going to be titled "The Power of Pacific Development." I'd like you to give you the opportunity to address that.
Well, right now in California, we have some people out there in this conference, and they're dealing with this very issue, which is specific. It is not something similar. It's a very specific issue, which I first became really steeped in when I was part of the original formation of the Fusion Energy Foundation. And the reason for that development was a number of leading scientists, including those who've been part of the World War II developments in this area. And we therefore decided to push thermonuclear fusion. That is, all right. Now, thermonuclear fusion was then promptly suppressed and has continued to be suppressed by universities. There are exceptions, of course, but in general by the teaching schools, and by industry, by scientists, all these kinds of things. Now, we have taken the bull by the horns now, recently. And we were looking at the prospect for the United States and for other parts of the world. We recognize that without thermonuclear fusion as being fully developed now, we could not possibly hope to bring the planet as a whole out of the catastrophe which is sitting on the planet right now. So therefore, we had one of our series of meetings that we discussed this matter, and we activated an approach to forcing through thermonuclear fusion as a global policy. We adopted a region from, say, the Mississippi River across the United States into the Pacific Ocean, up by the Alaska and so forth, and deep into the parts of Asia. Because this policy, which could be accomplished, the development of this probably within 5 or 7 years or something like that, we could actually have thermonuclear fusion effectively operating. With thermonuclear fusion, and not without it, the possibility of saving the planet's population, human population, from disaster is almost insoluble. Because the United States is a wasteland. There is no competence in general in the universities or anything else. There are people in the United States who, as scientists, can be regurgitated or something to become what they are potentially. We have people throughout the world who collectively, if they compose themselves accordingly, can actually bring forth, probably within 5-7 years, under the kind of program, probably solve the problem of exactly how to install and implement this thermonuclear fusion. That is the main hope for the people in the United States and the world as a whole. It is also an essential discovery for dealing with the problems of our solar system. And I'm not talking about the whole solar system as much as it's concentrating on the area between, say, the Earth, Mars, and related pieces of junk flying around up there. So this is the way we have to look at it. It's not something, it involves people who are creative. They have to be creative. Otherwise, they will fail. But if we start that program, and if we say, okay, let's take a policy. The United States is dead. The United States, in terms of its ability to maintain itself, is dead. You see that in the same thing we talked about earlier today, about the food supply. And what's happened is the policy now is you cannot provide a food supply to avoid that result. Therefore, we have to go back to drastic measures to make this thing work. And so, therefore, we need the principle of genius. Now, what do we got? Most people who are so-called scientists are scared, and because they're scared into incompetence. Because what you have now, you have a system of a policy, economic policies, throughout Europe, throughout most of the United States, is a junk pile. There is virtually no science being practiced. So what we have to do, we have to have a program, an economic program, a revival of the United States, but also most of the United States is a hopeless mess right now. So therefore what we have to do is concentrate on the Trans-Pacific region, because the Trans-Pacific region contains qualities of productivity in China and elsewhere which do not exist anymore in the United States. So therefore we have to have a global policy which takes this area, and it takes it from the Mississippi River, going westward, across the Pacific, by the Straits, and into about half of Asia. And those areas are salvageable. So the ability to save the planet, including the United States, including Europe, depends upon a program in which puts the emphasis on what still exists as a scientific capability of the relevant type in that region. A region from there, west of the Mississippi, across the Pacific, and deep into Asia. There we find enough ability, if properly nurtured, especially with the development of thermonuclear fusion, we can restore this planet. And we better get at it pretty fast.
Well, thank you very much. That's the conclusion for our webcast tonight. Thank you, Dennis, for joining me. Thank you very much, Lynn. And thank you all for participating. Stay tuned. Good night.